Let's crack open a beer and share some thoughts.
Okay, so what have we got then?
Is it 80 shilling? 90 shilling.
I went 50 or 80 then.
It's really good. I think it's.
So is this one of those?
If I homebrewed this myself as a 90 shilling, I would have been pretty happy with it.
So is it like a Scotch ale? Is it one of those kind of ones? Because wasn't the
It's
50,
gentle,
80, 90 was their way of describing the strength, wasn't it?
And an 80 shillings, like a best bitter, it would only be just over 4%, 4.4 or something like that, top end. And to me, that tastes like a beautiful keg version of an 80 or 90 shilling.
It's nice. It's
Lots
quite
of
light,
light,
isn't it? Around the.
As it should be for a beer. That's the whole idea. Instead of having the hop character that makes you want to come back for another one, it's the dryness of Scottish beers, which is what I love. I brewed a lot of Scottish style beers as a home brewer, and that's kind of like exactly what I was going for. Big, beautiful malt flavour up front, then dry finish that just makes you want to take another sip.
Why did homebrew the Scotch beers? Can't be that many people who do that for homebrews.
It's my kind of my dad. I started off as a home brewer in New Zealand, and my dad had always kind of raved on about Scottish beers and what the brewing scene had been like in Edinburgh when he first came over to New Zealand, and how much he missed it.
Oh, okay,
And then the first time I went the first time I went to Edinburgh when I was 18 years old, I went and drank in like all the old pubs that he used to drink in, and they had 80 shilling on, hand pump everywhere, and they were fucking beautiful. Just blew my mind about what beer could be, because I'd never really tasted proper malty beer before then. It'd always been kind of like, at the most like an amber lager or something in New Zealand.
That's interesting.
Or a dark.
It's an interesting intro to beer then.
Very dark lager, yeah. So I got over there and I remember drinking in a place he called it the Grave Diggers, it's called the Athletic Arms. It's just down the road from like the Hearts Stadium. My dad hated Hearts, he was a Hibs fan, but he drank there a lot with his brothers who were both Hearts fans, and he would go off to watch Hibs play and they would go down to see Hearts play. And they always drank I think it was probably McEwen's 80 shilling at that stage. Which to us, when you read the description of what an 80 shilling beer is, it sounds like cloying and sweet.
Yeah. Like I said, those
horrible.
really thick Scotch ales.
It's not that, is it?
No.
It's not that what we're tasting.
But it's
there.
actually it's like a beautifully malty, dry, gentle, drinkable beer. Like that has the dryness of it has the same drinkability of what the bitterness of a best bitter or a ordinary bitter has for English drinkers.
But it's definitely got that sweetness, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Which
So
sort of
sweet up front,
distinguishes
really
it.
Nice dry finish, which just kind of like brings you back to have another one.
But it's quite nice on keg as well, because it's just got a bit of life to it.
Yeah.
got a
Maybe
bit
they'll
of
do a
fizz.
live one.
Maybe, and then completely ruin it, possibly. So, as you may have guessed, the voice that you've been hearing hasn't been mine or Martin's.
We haven't affected a Kiwi accent all of a sudden.
No, that was Stu McKinley from Yeastie Boys, who joins us for tonight's podcast. And we're also joined in this collab within a crossover, within a guesting, within a collab, within a crossover. We're joined by Michael Lalley from Bushcraft Beer. Welcome to Hopinions. This is the first time we've had you on as a guest this way round. Obviously, as the Beer O'Clock Show, we guested on one of your podcasts in the past. It's great to have you on. And we're here tonight basically on the back of one of your 3 Bullet Tuesday posts, which talks about beers and their availabilities and why you choose certain beers. So I think probably without further ado, let's get straight into that and start discussing the post that we're talking about.
Yeah, thanks. So I think I started this kind of 3 Bullet Tuesday maybe towards the end of last year, and the whole idea was just to kind of not overthink things and just get kind of my thoughts and views out there and really start a conversation on topics that I thought were interesting. So I think it was mid-December I put a post out, and I was really talking about what I felt was influences around beer choices. And so there were certain things around the social media and marketing aspects of a brewery, its availability, what I thought of the beers, or what I thought of recommendations or insights from other people that I respected. And what I did was mapped that out into a matrix that then put particular breweries in particular spots, really from my own perception. And I don't know if anyone's read the post or not, but there was 4 parts to the matrix, and really it was looking at frequency of consumption and really looking at which beers I kind of drink regularly, and then kind of my perception of that brewery and whether it was positive or negative. So if you map that out, you end up with 4 different boxes. So there was in the top left the rare positive, and that was really breweries that I had a positive view of, but maybe I didn't drink as often for whatever reason, whether it was availability or whatever. Top right was frequent positive, and that's those ones that I drank a lot of and had a positive view on. Bottom left was one's rare negative, I dubbed it, and that was where I rarely drank it and had a negative kind of perception. And then there was the frequent negative, which was breweries that I maybe frequently drink but didn't necessarily have the most positive view. And I put, I think, 10 different breweries and mapped them out on that matrix. And it led to, I guess, some debate, which is why we're here today, which was, I guess, good. And at the time, I think it was kind of the most response I've had to any post. So it obviously struck a chord with people's views on how they make their kind of beer buying decisions.
I think there was quite a good Twitter discussion about it, wasn't there?
There was indeed, and it was as a result of that ended up having 2 separate conversations with Stu and Michael about doing a podcast, and then it just made sense just to do it as one, and to bring everyone together and to discuss through it. So we made the most of that, and obviously we put a poll out at the weekend asking people what their views were on it.
Opinions, 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 opinions.
The question that we asked this week was, what influences your beer buying decisions? Now, some of this might fit into those 4 areas that you speak about. So we asked people whether it was hype recommendations, whether it was a brewery that they trust, or whether it was the price of the beer. We had 373 votes, which was probably, I think it's our second highest poll that we've ever run. So people were getting engaged with this. 51% of the votes, so over half of the votes, were in favour of it being a brewery that they trust, that they know and trust. And then the next one being recommendations at 35%, hype being 9%, and then the price of beer being 5%. So those are some of the views, or that's certainly the votes that we had. In terms of some of the comments, I'm just going to pick out a couple of them, and then we can jump into looking at the 4 boxes and talking about really what does it mean to us as consumers, as somebody that sells beer in the industry. What does it actually mean to us? So hype was an interesting one. We had a couple of comments. So from the OWL team, hyped beers are recommended on social media, so sometimes they go hand in hand. The more people post, the more that you want that beer. And then Joe Tinder at Fatal Glass said, it's interesting to consider where recommendations stop and hype begins. And I thought that was a
grey area.
That was a great point.
It's a really grey area, though, isn't it? Where does hype
Great
begin?
comment, though, for us who are all on the inside of the industry.
Yeah.
You know, like, hype is, one thing amongst our friends, but that's also a recommendation to people who are slightly further outside the industry, who just, perhaps want to get into the inner industry, and they think there's big hype about a certain brewery, when for us it's just us all saying to each other, shit, this is really good. We really like this beer.
Yeah.
So what's your stance on the whole hype thing?
I look at for me, honestly, there's two perspectives, and they're very clear cut. For me, one is, I want to sell my beer because I'm selling beer, and the other one is I want to drink beer because first and foremost, I'm just a guy who loves beer. And to me, on the hype thing, obviously hype captures my attention, and all of the hype I get is from the inner sanctum of the beer scene. So I know people within the industry, and they're telling me that this is good, or this is not so good, or whatever. And so I wouldn't even call it hype. I would call, the closest I would get to hype is a recommendation, because I'm too far into the beer scene to really understand what hype really is. So the recommendations, then I get down to a set group of people who I really trust. And obviously my trust group is quite wide around the whole country, whereas if you're just into beer and you live in southeast of London or the northeast or down in Kent, your trusted group, the people who you live nearby who bring beer into your bottle store, and we've talked about that already offline before we started about where you trust, who you trust, to bring new beers into your life, and how you trust them, and why you trust them.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. So, and a very real example for me is Cannonball, right? So, Steve, I know that you are a big fan of the beer.
Probably the nation's biggest advocate.
And so that's an example of, Steve really likes that. I'll have to try it and see if what he, as a person that influences, my buying decisions, I guess, has to think about that, because, is it as good as he says it is? I want to try that for myself. And I think you're right, within this kind of beer community, which is getting bigger but still relatively small, I think there are a couple of powerful influences, both be it kind of people or movements, right? So I think what we've seen a lot on social media is, we've got things like Craft Beer Hour, we've had things like Beer Bods for a while, the Hop God Friday hashtag as well. And so I do think that you do have these, whether they're kind of credible as taste judges, but they are attract a following, and they do like to talk about certain types of beers, right? So I think there is that as an absolute influence that cannot be underestimated in terms of buying decisions.
I think that's a great shout on the craft beer hour in particular. That's massive now on a Tuesday night. The number of people that are regularly engaging with craft beer hour. And sometimes there are feature beers, but most of the time it's just people enjoying whatever is the latest beer and sharing that with the community. And it's a great way to engage with the community and this community that we talk about, to see what's popular and what are the beers that we should be maybe searching out at the moment, if that's the right thing to say.
Yeah, I think so. And they do have, like you said, they've got a good following now. There's really good following that Tom has got going there. And when he does get the breweries in, even when he does get breweries in, I don't feel excluded from joining in. So I don't always manage to get hold of the beers, because sometimes I'm not going to order 3 beers from one brewery unless I've got another set of beers in mind to order. But I can still get to learn a bit about them, and then if other people are favourably talking about them, then, like you say, it might influence my decision further down the line when I see them. So I think they've done fantastic with that, building up. But is it hype or is it recommendations?
I don't think I wouldn't class craft beer hour as hype. I think a lot of that is recommendations, and like you said, I think the fact that they bring in kind of host breweries occasionally, and what they've started doing really well as well now is if a brewery's hosting, Tom searches out where in the country are stocking that brewery's beers, so people can go and find the beers in preparation.
Yeah, because he does talk about them as well, doesn't he?
Yeah, for the following week.
Does that mean we're a bit more immune to hype in our beer circle?
It's you can't tell when you're influenced by hype or recommendation, because you sort of transcend it as you move into beer more and more.
Yeah.
So early on, you go out into a pub in London and your friends who don't really know anything about beer compared to us who know a reasonable amount about beer are all talking about Gamma Ray or Brewdog, Punk, something like that. And for them, at that point, that's hype. But then as you get to know more and more people, and you get to know more and more people who know a lot more about beer than you do, you become influenced by them, even though most people would think it's hype, based on the fact that thinking about 2 or 3 beers a week that they're talking about, rather than the 100 beers they're talking about. And we've all been through that. I think we're all, as I say, there's a sort of inner sanctum of beer that we're a part of now, and we kind of have weeded out the people who we're not interested in listening to because their beer tastes are different, or their political views are different, or something like that. And you start to get to know, more and more over time, who the people are that you kind of have a bit of a bond with within the sector?
There are circles within that as well, though, aren't there? Because and you can put some of these circles down to regionality as well, because there will be a group of, say, people from Manchester or from Leeds or from Sheffield that will be talking about a certain beer or a certain brewery, but yet you're sat somewhere else in the country and you're like, well, I don't get this, because they're hyping up a brewery whose beers I've even never tried, or I'm never going to be able to try.
And I think that was one of the things that I tried to get across in my post was, there is brewers that I look positively on because of that reason, but they're just not available in London. Like Magic Rock was one until they released their cans. I rarely kind of saw them here. Marble is another that I kind of said I would love to try their beer, but I just don't see them in that many places. But I think some of those things we spoke about is really around drinkers and their engagement with each other. The other angle here is the breweries and what they push out onto social media as well, and how they do that and how they engage. And I think that was another angle that I tried to kind of make clear in my post is I think there's some breweries that I really like the style in which they communicate, the transparency, the openness that I see in some of their communication. And then there's other breweries quite openly slagging off, distributors or suppliers or, whatever, which, I think some people...
Which we all want to do.
Yeah, for sure. And I think some people admire that kind of openness and honesty, and they can really relate. But I think for others, it's kind of not what they want to engage with the breweries online. So I don't know. I'm interested in your perspective on that, Stu.
I guess it's to me, I think we should name some names, and I think like bottom left, which is your rear negative. You don't drink much of, and you think slightly negative of them in some way. But I'm guessing you put them on there because you like the beers. You had Chilton in there.
Yep.
Who I think are one of the best breweries in the country, and I absolutely love the fact that they just say it like it is. They have that antipathy, and hopefully people can understand the difference between our voices. In New Zealand and Australian here, it might be confusing to a lot of people. But I love the fact that they get out there and say, if someone hasn't paid their bills, or if they got, I think the best one I ever saw from Chilton was that Tesco had approached them, and they kind of just made a big joke about it. We can't make enough to sell our beer to Tesco, so why would we even think about it? But what do you guys think? Do you wish you could pick up our beer in Tesco? And I think that's, to me, that's
a great way of going to his customers.
Absolutely the best way of engaging with social media. Even though every single customer who's ever drank Chilton would say, no, fuck off, stay out of Tesco, and he knows that. But I think it's just a nice way to just have a bit of a conversation about it.
Do you think?
Because the bigger you get, it becomes harder to fit into one of those boxes, and you move across different boxes from different people. For me, it's a difficult thing for me as a business person who knows how hard it is to make beer and make money from it, and also to be a seller of beer who knows what people think of my product. When they find it in a M&S and they think, shit, I'm never going to buy that again from my little local craft beer store because I can get it for like 80p less at M&S. Even though they don't know the fact that we're seeing one case to their local craft beer store so they can go buy it from there, but they've travelled 50 miles to the M&S, who are buying 20 pallets of us.
Yeah. But there's loads of customers not on social media, right? I mean, that's the thing. It's like, what?
It's very scary. I wish they were all on social media.
Yeah, like, there is the power of that.
I never want my dad on social media, ever.
I think about someone like Camera. They've got something like 60,000 followers on Twitter, but 180,000 members. So, there's a large part of their audience that isn't on social media. So is it a small echo chamber? Or is it, a real advocate for a wider audience? And I think that's the whole thing, right? If I'm Cholton and I'm engaging with my self-selected Twitter audience, am I really going to get the right decision versus having maybe a wider or more considered debate and approach to that? So, I don't know, I think there's pros and cons on the way to approach.
I guess with
some of these
Cholton,
things.
he wasn't after a reasoned decision. He'd made his mind up anyway. So, like you say, he was putting it out there to reaffirm with his the people who liked his beers and liked his ethos, that this was the right thing to do anyway.
Yeah.
It was reaffirming that
Even though if he
approach.
was doing that, he's just having a bit of fun. You know, like,
I mean,
I
there
do
was an
wonder
element of that.
whether any of that was driven by the whole vocation thing as well, because obviously vocation put their beers into Tesco's and there was a noticeable drop in quality of their beers. I remember having vocation beers when they weren't available in Tesco's and they were stunning. They, you know, blow your socks off, stunning. And then I was so excited to get cans from Tesco's, took them home and tried them, and they were flat, they were lifeless, all the flavour had gone, and I was just like, I just felt really let down as a consumer. So I do wonder whether he did have that in the back of his mind of, if I put my stuff into Tesco's, am I going to be able to meet their demand?
Yeah.
And retain the quality that I know my customers want.
Yeah, I think the supermarket thing's an interesting one. I think Brewdog, they kind of got an order from memory for a big supermarket order, and they had to kind of beg, borrow and steal to be able
When
to...
they started,
they started to be able to fulfill that. And you just wonder how important was that in terms of the company they've grown and become, or
They've mentioned
not,
they
right?
mentioned it quite a bit
I
as
don't know.
part of their background
Yeah.
story. So my feeling's always been it was a big part of what they did.
It's also been the driver behind their recent home Brewdog challenge as well, that you know, they're putting those beers, the winner of that competition, the beers are now on sale in Tesco's as well, so they've retained that link. But I'm guessing they've got a slightly
as a
stronger
homebrewer.
position when they're bargaining
Yeah,
with
yeah.
Tesco's now than when they had when they first started.
Oh yeah, but I think that they mentioned it in their background story
Yeah.
when they're doing talks and presentations. So I think it was a big part
Yeah.
of what they did. But they can. It's also easy for them to say that now anyway because of the stage they're at to mention that.
So can I actually come back to something that I think the poll was quite interesting, was I think only 5% of the people that were surveyed said price was a factor.
Yeah, that's
I
because
guess
we're in a bubble.
That's a
As
self-selecting bubble.
do you
Yeah,
think so?
that's the craft bubble.
Yeah.
If my dad was asked that, it'd be price
Right.
straight away. It's price.
Yeah.
The rest of it means nothing to him.
Yeah, there's still a bit of loyalty with him. Like he'll have some brands that he's interested in. And,
Yeah.
you know, like.
But that brand is more expensive in one place to another. He'll remember it was more expensive there than the place before. So, a good example is he lives in Milton Keynes. Milton Keynes is a bit of the beer desert, but they've recently had a draft house opened. And every now and again, there is a couple of crossovers on the beers, but he remembers the spoon's price versus
Right.
the draft house
Yep.
price.
Yeah.
And-
Very different.
Yes.
You're always going to remember the spoon's price on anything.
Yeah,
aren't
but
you?
and from my dad, he's like, well, that makes no sense. So even with the brand loyalty, it's like, well, that makes no sense to him. Two pubs, I can walk between them, but yet one's charging me that, and one's charging me that, and one of them is giving me a voucher to get money off it as well. So price,
so his
price
decision is driven by price.
that would
then.
be a big starting point. And I was going to bring it up as well if my claim, because I think that a lot of that is driven by who we interact with, whether that be blogging, podcasting, or just in Twitter in general, that price came last.
But what that does tell you, though, is, you know, within that kind of social media savvy craft beer buyer, price really doesn't seem to be a huge factor,
Not
right?
that they think,
Right,
but I
okay.
still think it is. You know,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
At the end of the day, you know, our beer will be, you know, on the shelf for £3, and Gamma Ray will be on the shelf for $2.20, and they're always going to buy the Gamma Ray. Really.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
They're not going to buy our beer because it's 30% more expensive, 30-40% more expensive.
Are you talking about new drinkers aren't going to go for
No, I
your
just
beer?
think in
or
general,
just-
you know, like in general, like the big volume is going to be massively influenced by price. So the survey was amongst a bunch of beer geeks, people like us,
Yep.
who are really interested in like drinking lots of different beer all the time. But those fine margins become really important when you start to grow and you become bigger and bigger, and you're selling to different sorts of customers. One of the things that we haven't touched on at all yet, and no one really did in your survey, was about locality. And I think that's going to become like a massive thing over the next 10 or 20 years. It's already big in America, and I'm starting to see it massively in London as well. You know, if you live in the southeast, you might drink some Gypsy Hill, you might drink some Brick Brewery or something like that. If you live in the north east, you probably have never even heard of those breweries. They don't exist because people are like, building breweries who are building clientele close to where they live, and they might be selling out of their brewery. They might be selling just to their local pubs and everything, but people can see the brewery down the road, or they've got an idea. They see the person delivering the beer all the time.
So
and they
talking
get accustomed to
something
that.
about craft, not craft breweries so much, but micro breweries here that are setting up in their locale.
It's more like it's that village thing. So even though we're talking about London, it's people taking over like their principality, isn't it? And that becomes there. Duncan Sandbrook said the same thing last year when I spoke to him about it becoming more of a people being associated with the location they were in and very much targeting that area and being say we want to build, and that's why they're all opening tap houses as well now. So people come to the venue, you get that loyalty that we used to have necessarily for our local. We used to have a local pub we had the loyalty for. Now maybe it might be the brewery and the brewery tap house, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess they all have different business models, right? So I think Brick, right, in Peckham is like a local tap room and local brewery that sells a lot on site and then distributes locally for some of their other beers. I mean, I think that times 1,000 is Fuller's, right? So they are based in West London. They own loads of pubs in West London. And if you listen to John Keeling, and I heard a great podcast with him not that long ago, that's what he almost compares Fuller's to like a football team. Like, they're like everyone's local brewery.
That was
you guys hear that?
All About Beer
brilliant,
podcast.
Brilliant interview.
Where Yeastie Boys did get a name check more than once.
They did, yeah, because you guys, I think, did a collaboration with Fuller.
We did the summer one last year, didn't you?
Yeah, so I mean that was one of the things that made me comment on your original blog post, which was you've got Fullers in the frequent negative, which you have to drink them because they're all in all the pubs around you.
Stuart's going first.
That's slightly disappointing for you. Whereas for me, I see them as like to me they are probably in the rear positive. So I have the emotional connection to them, and the fact that one of the influences in me becoming a home brewer back in New Zealand was that I got to drink Fuller's beer in New Zealand, and I was drinking ESB 1845, some of the vintage ales and stuff like that, and I fell in love with beer partly because of the fact that I drank really, really good beer from them.
None of the session stuff.
Well, of course, I couldn't travel that far, so but I had a positive connection with them already. And then I founded Yeastie Boys with a friend of mine who had lived in London for a few years, and he drank London Pride all the time. I was on tap, every time he went out after work, he would drink pints and pints of London Pride. And then I came back over here, and in between times I'd actually met John Keeling at a beer festival, at a beer week down in Sydney, got on really well with him. And so immediately I had a positive feeling about Fuller's because I liked the beers, and I like the guy behind it, so I had the sort of, the lovely beer character, positive feelings, plus, the fact that someone nice works for them, not some asshole head brewer or something. And I never get to drink them, even though now that I'm living in the UK, I hardly ever walk into a Fuller's pub, or if I walk into a pub, it's probably quite rare for me down in Kent to see that. It's all sheep and meat pubs, so it's quite rare for me to see Fuller's beers. So they're to me more in the, frequent, sort of rear positive rather than the frequent negative. So the exact opposite dichotomy from where you're at.
See, for me, they've been the frequent positive. I'm quite lucky where I am, but I've got easy access to Fuller's pubs in the city, and I look forward to going into them as well. I've got I like their cask beers, and I also love the beers you just name check. The vintage ESB, their vintage ales. I'm a big fan of their pubs and their beers and stuff. I mean, what made you put them in the rare? It's a rare negative, isn't it?
I think it's interesting. So I'm not a huge cask beer drinker. I think I put that in one of my other posts not that long ago, and I think maybe it didn't have the same nuanced appreciation of cask beer that you had, Stu. I think coming from down under, you are used to your cold, fizzy kind of beers. They're the de rigueur, the mainstream And so coming over here, it's kind of, you know, the warm beer in England kind of thing. But
So sorry. Oh well. No, not even that. Why is it warm? You mean warm? It's not
Warmer,
It's not
warmer,
fucking freezing.
warmer.
It's the difference.
I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
think we need to go there. I mean, I think,
I do think he's going to say the word warm.
So let me
Part
finish.
two.
I think the other thing
there's
about
probably
Fuller's
no
is
Antipodeans listening to this.
Yeah.
And if they're the only ones who can understand the difference between Australian and New Zealand accents.
so the other thing about Fuller's for me is that, I mean, look, I think they've got a great legacy, great history. You know, they do preserve that, you know, the British pubs and all of that. I'm always slightly underwhelmed with their selection of beers. I think you go into the pubs and they'll have all their casks and a lot of their keg lines, which they clearly created as craft brands. And I would have loved to have seen them use those lines to either promote kind of other craft breweries, or do collaborations with other breweries, or I don't know. Like, so for me, I kind of felt they could potentially do more to promote lots of other great things about beer in the pub and all of that. And that would be my kind of one kind of.
But that'd be like a football
feedback,
club
right?
and their shop selling Liverpool shop selling Man United tops. Why would you do that?
Yeah.
That makes no sense to me at all.
No, but they do. They sell
Yeastie
Sierra
Boys
Nevada. They sell,
That's
you know,
because they
Peroni.
import it.
They
Yeah.
sell.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So they do a few,
sell
but I mean-
a whole bunch of other things.
If I go into a Fuller's pub, I get pissed off with the Fuller's pubs near me at work because they only have 2 or 3 of their cast lines on.
Yeah.
And one of them is Oliver's Island, which I think is quite a bland golden beer. They always have Pride on, quite rightly anyway, and then they'll maybe have a Gales. And I'm thinking, well, where's your other beers? Where is your Bengal Lancer? Why the hell have you stopped doing Chiswick Bitter on cask on a regular basis and things like that? So I actually go the opposite way. I'm peed off and they haven't got more of the Fuller's range on there because that's what I want when I go to Fuller's
But
pub.
it's the cask range, right? I mean, that's what they're kind of known for.
And from your point of view, you're not going in predominantly for cask, are you?
No. And
Because you're not
so they just opened
there.
or refurbed a pub in Canary Wharf near where I work. And
Is that a tea merchant?
it's brilliant. Yeah, they've got some great
It's a bit
cask
too food-led,
lines.
though.
The food's good too.
Yeah,
but
but-
the keg lines was all like they have a keg IPA, a keg pale ale, a keg red, and I just think that would have been a great opportunity to showcase. You know, a great opportunity to showcase some other breweries. I don't know.
Yeah, but it's not going to happen in the tea
tea
merchant, is it? Because Canary Wharf is very food-led.
They've got really good access to Yeastie Boys and Thornbridge. If you need to, just like ask.
Yeah.
You know, can you get some Yeastie
They
Boys?
do
and Thornbridge
sell
in there?
quite a range of guest stuff in bottles and cans, though.
In the city, they do.
Yeah, I mean, I've been into the parcel yard and I've seen
great.
But you see,
quite a range of beers on
to
in
be
there.
fair to Mike, you see the tap range first, don't you?
You do, but
And-
even so, normally, I mean, I've been in the parcel yard and they've had like East London Brewery cask beer on in there.
But again, going back to your point about Michael, Michael's looking at the keg line first.
I
of all.
suppose so, yeah. I mean, I've got to admit, I'm always a little underwhelmed by a Fuller's keg.
Yeah, but I never look at the keg line first.
No, I
just
don't
look
want
at
to
the
harp
cast
on
line.
about Fuller's,
I'm
but
the
I
same,
think
I came from New Zealand and I came here to drink warm flat beer.
yeah,
You know?
I think the other thing is, and I know that SEBA's trying to define craft beer, and they're saying it's about being less than 2,000 hectolitres and a couple of other things. And you know, Fuller's would not be a craft brewery by their definition. You know, they're a listed company. They've got outside investment. You know, only 30-40% of their revenues from beer. So they're kind of a pubco / brewery, not taking anything away from their brewing heritage, which is very, very strong. But I don't know. I just think there's other factors around kind of my decision to put them where I kind of put them.
So not just the beer then.
So I'm going to take this to.
But they're not just a brewery. I guess that's kind of my point.
Well, they are brewery.
Yeah.
That's
Do they
their
not fit
starting
into
point.
that? In the UK, we don't have a definition of craft.
No, we
breweries.
do. SEBA has
No, we don't. No, we
defined
don't.
it.
No,
they
no.
have.
Not like,
They have.
not like there is in the States, where there's an actual definition and you've got to meet that definition to be a craft beer brewery.
But you don't
what-
think SEBA have done that?
No.
Not yet. But what we've got in the UK is another level that possibly doesn't exist in the States or anywhere else in the world. Is that we've got the big regional breweries.
Yes,
So
that
you've
own
got
pub
your
networks as
Fullers,
well.
you've got
Yeah.
your Adnams, you've got your
Yeah.
Green Kings, your Lees, you've got all of your regional breweries up
Yeah,
and down
yeah.
the country, and you can't. The only category you can put those into is big regional breweries because, like you say, they own their own pubs. They can supply their own pubs. They can supply their own beers into those pubs. I don't think the likes of those breweries would be searching for
but I think this is where it's hard to define it in this country, right? Because the US has their 3-tier distribution. In Australia, strangely, it's purely based on size, and big breweries with brands that are below a certain capacity can be classified as craft. And I think here there's some historical quirks. There's some regional brewers. There's ones where they make more money from not the brewing side of the business. They have big pub estates. How do you take all
Sorry,
those
I need to
things
go back to
into
this. What's the problem with that? Because without that money, they can't do all the brewing. I mean, we've already had all the stuff this year about how little money can be made on cask. So surely you need to make your revenue elsewhere. So then making their revenue elsewhere and still brewing cask should be a good thing.
Well,
But
I guess it's
Michael
around.
doesn't go looking for cask.
No, but I still need to come back to the point.
But I
I'm
think
sorry,
that's
I still
kind
need
of
to come
part
back to
of
the
the
point.
debate, isn't it? Though it's like, what is a craft brewery? And if I said to you,
But we weren't talking. The craft doesn't come into that necessarily. If your Fullers aren't even pretending to be craft, as our example from your
no,
your
absolutely,
square.
they're not.
What they have done though is, 10 years ago they didn't have really any of their own keg lines. So there was no Frontier Lager, there was no Montana
No,
Red, there was
wasn't.
no Keg
Yeah,
IPA.
yeah.
So already they have moved to doing what they consider to be the type of keg beers that might interest newcomers, but they're not trying to alienate the people who love Fuller's. The mainstays of Fuller's pubs. The reason why people go into Fuller's pubs in the first place. I go to Fuller's pubs for their cask, but I like their keg IPA. But if I see Lancer on cask, I'll ignore the keg straight away. Because Lancer on cask is fantastic in my mind. So I would ignore the keg anyway, craft or otherwise. But I think that if you're earning money from all your other bits, but you're still producing great beer, I personally have no problem with that, because I want you to fund your beer. If someone says Fuller's, I still think of beer and pubs.
But isn't that the same argument of like the big macros are, reducing the price of things so to their advantage because they've got scale? Like, isn't that same argument that we'll reduce the price of things so we can sell it in our own pubs and we've got a captive market? Do you know what I mean? Like, I think there's that. How can you say like, oh, big companies are bad because they drive down price, but then use that same argument that says, isn't it great Fuller's can keep their beer cheap because they've got their own?
I wouldn't
pubs?
say. I wouldn't.
guess it's-
Personally, I wouldn't say
I don't
Fuller's
know.
beer is cheap.
I wouldn't. I've paid like a £5 a pint for London Pride in one of our own bars before. So I don't think their beer is cheap.
We probably don't need to get into the debate of are Fuller's good or are they not. I think we can probably,
We've given it plenty of airtime.
We can agree to a majority that 3 out of 4 of us say Fuller's really good.
No.
And one
Yeah.
of them lives in like an area where you can only buy Fuller's. So you're a little bit stuck on it. But I think it comes back to, it definitely comes back to, the quadrant or the matrix. That if a beer is absolutely everywhere, for people like us, it doesn't, seem quite as good because you can find it absolutely everywhere. And I don't know, I'd be interested to see how you think about Magic Rock now, 6 months down the track. Now that you can see it in every single pub you walk into, you look over the fridge and you see their cans in there. Not that you probably buy cans from pubs very often.
I'd still rather see it on keg than in a can, in a fridge in a bar.
Yeah, but down here we don't do it.
No.
Where we
Not
very
frequently,
rarely
no.
see
Yeah.
Magic Rock or another one of the ones you quoted, Cloud Water. We don't see them on Handpool, keg, tap, whatever it might be. So, it is only bottles or cans, and I rarely buy those in pubs anyway.
And why should we when the beers locally are so good?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
There's a lot of shitty beers locally, but there is a lot of fucking great beer that is just around the corner from us. For me, I'm down in Kent. It's much harder to find anything local. But as soon as I get into London, every time I look at a tap, it'll be a national brewery or someone who's probably about 3 or 4 miles away, and I know it's going to be good. And that was one of the things that came up in the the response from the Twitter crowd, which was essentially, I trust them.
Yeah, I mean the brewery I trust thing, which took over half of it.
Yeah,
it does play a big
51%
part.
people saying
It
that,
does
yeah.
play a big part.
So Fuller's to me are a brewery I trust, and lots of local breweries like the Colonel are breweries I trust.
That's the next one I was going to say.
Yeah. I mean, I
Absolute
went
other end of
into
the spectrum, but 8 years ago, there would have been a lot of people who had been in my situation, who had moved to London, who knew a lot about beer, and would have said Colonel were not a brewery they would trust. But now they are. They've got to that point.
And I think we've got the kind of next generation of those breweries coming through, because I went into the Ale House in Chelmsford at the weekend, and there was an elusive brew beer on, the Overdrive. Without a second thought, I ordered a pint of it, because I know that that's a brand that I can trust. I know that Andy's beers are going to be solid and they're going to taste good and it's going to be exactly what I want. And it was a cracking pint. I absolutely enjoyed it. And had he not turned up to take me off to somewhere else, I would have been having a second and a third pint of it. But it's so
It's a shame
much
you could have
of
had
it.
a second one because the taxi.
I could have had a second one, yeah.
And why can you trust it though? I mean, can you trust it because he's part of the beer community? I mean, Andy's like a very prominent part
See,
of the beer
that's
community.
a tough
or
one.
Or you trust it because someone's told you it's good?
I trust it for two reasons. One, because he's come from the beer community, and because I've known him for a long time, and I've known his journey as a home brewer and going into a commercial brewery. The other thing is that every beer that I've had from him has been cracking. I've not had a bad beer from him, and that for me is the thing that defines trust. It's that when you get beer after beer from the same brewery that's as good as the last beer.
To me, the important thing is like the next step from there is the people who, unlike us, who don't know anything about beer, who aren't listening to this podcast, but hopefully one day they'll come across it. If they can trust the pub that gets it.
Yeah.
Which I'm guessing that it's probably a pretty good pub if it's getting elusive beer.
Yeah, the pub, it's where we hold the Essex Bottle Share once a month, the Ale House. So they always have 12 casks on rotating anyway.
Yeah.
There's always 12 on the go at any one time, and we trust them to deliver. So it may not be a beer I like, but it'll be delivered the right way.
But they've also got because they've got a good cellarman as well.
Yes.
That knows how to look after those beers and make sure they're delivered on absolute tip-top form.
Yeah. So for me, it's more about choosing a beer I think or know I like, rather than me having to worry about the condition it will come out. So that bit's already gone.
So I think that's an interesting point, is that even if you see the recommendation online or whatever, you've still got to buy it from somewhere. And whether that's a supermarket or a bottle shop or your local pub that you trust or an online store, you've still got to buy it, right? And it's still got to be available. And I think there's this weird shift at the moment where we've had some incredible specialist craft beer bottle shops spring up in the last couple of years, and I think that they serve a really big kind of agenda in terms of informing the customer and making recommendations and all of those things. Then you've got the supermarkets getting really big into it. I mean, M&S have kind of led the way, and Tesco's kind of following. And then you've got some good pubs that really showcase some really good beers. And I think that on the back of this, I did reach out to our friends at Hop Burns and Black to ask them around kind of how does buying decisions work in a craft beer bottle shop. And I think what they were saying is that they've kind of built a beer list that they think their customers will like, and the power of their recommendation is really important. And they say no to some people as well, which I thought was really interesting. But they also said there's some big trophy beers, I think they call them, that really get the punters in. Your Cloudwater double IPAs and all of that.
I mentioned Yeastie Boys amongst that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they did. Yeah. But that comes from a combination of brewery messaging it well, and the social media gets people into the store, and there's that kind of journey, isn't there, that ultimately gets people to actually buy the beer.
There's almost a story there, and for us, probably not for the rest of the world, but for us, that these kind of bottle stores are becoming the new pub. Because we can drink in there, we can go in and we can drink like a few bottles rather than a few casks. So they don't have to take the risk on the cask and know that it's going to sell to a lot of people. They can buy a dozen bottles, and they know that people like us who would come in and drink them, and they're going to take a couple away. So the whole drinking kind of behaviour of people in Britain is changing, especially in London, I think. And to me, it's kind of funny because in New Zealand, we always drink at home. You know, most of what we drank was at home or at someone else's house at a barbecue, you know, or down at the beach or something like that. It's not based around drinking in the pub. We would go to the pub after work for a few beers and then we'd go home. You know, in the summer, when it's still light till 9 or 10 o'clock at night, we'd drink at home, across the road, and you know, move our feet in the sand and drink a bottle of beer there or something. Whereas the UK, I think, has like been very based around this pub culture of drinking at the pub all the time. That's changing. People are starting to drink in restaurants and cafes and drinking at home a little bit more. So the whole kind of thing about the death of the pub is actually nothing to do with the death of people drinking. It's just the changing landscape.
Places.
The changing landscape of where we drink. And then that becomes like, you know, where you can become more influenced by. You're now drinking, instead of the pub, you're drinking at the brewery, you know, which is awesome for us as beer lovers. Or you're drinking at the cafe, which is just down the road.
So interestingly, I think the first place I drank a Brewdog and a Colonel was in a cafe. So I think that was a really interesting market for some of these craft brewers when they started off. So yeah, I kind of agree that people aren't drinking, well, maybe they're drinking less, but the places in which they drink is changing for sure.
Yeah, some of the reasons for, you know, people leaving pubs to drink elsewhere is probably because pubs are not giving them the options that they would like to have.
So that's coming down to choice, isn't it? Which is something I've been banging on about for a few weeks now since I did my walk-in pub tour of my local town, where I was faced with very little choice in terms of beers. But if I'm going to go into, if I'm going to become a regular or a local somewhere, then I want that venue to be serving me with, I don't know, maybe one or two beers that I know are good, so like a core range, but then I want them to be serving a range of new beers and experimental stuff that I can try, and I can either try new styles or new breweries, and just giving me more access to new things.
But I think that's an interesting point, because I think what we will see or are seeing is, you know, drinkers that have that kind of absolute preference to go back to beers and breweries they know and experiment at the same time. So I guess it's the fight for how do you become on that loyal side of the beers that I constantly go back to, whether it's Cannonball, whether for me it's like a Gamma Ray, and then be on that list of beers I want to try. You know what I mean? You're kind of competing for two different spaces there.
Totally,
Yeah.
I mean, my favourite pub near where I live, it's about a 30-minute walk, and it's without a doubt one of my favourite pubs in the whole country that I've been to since I've been here for 18 months or so. It's a Harvey's pub, and there's a couple of other beers in the fridge that are not Harvey's, but it'll be like Stella Artois and Heineken or something. But they have Harvey's Old Ale, which I absolutely love, and it's always in like top-notch condition. And they have some other good Harvey's beers, which I'm not so keen on, but they're always in top-notch condition. And the food is fucking amazing.
So they have
And
Stella
the
in the
welcome-
fridge?
I don't know if it's
Or
Stella,
on
but
the-
they've got
yeah,
some
yeah.
stuff that I've never even properly looked at.
Because I always think Stella in bottles is like the guy wearing a shirt with a tuxedo printed on it. It's kind of like got this like fancy foil around like the bottle opener and stuff, and it's like, oh, that's a fancy beer, but really it's not so much.
To be fair, the macro brands did nail presentation pretty early on with bottles and glasses.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
for
yeah.
me, long term, you know, I would like to think that in 2 years' time, from visiting that pub every week, because I love it. It's a great pub. The food is unbelievably good. It's a nice walk from my house, and the beer, you know, to me, Harvey's Old Ale is one of the best beers in the world, and it's a really good pub in good condition. Lots of craft beer drinkers, people listening to this, will probably not ever even look at it. But if we could all sit down, if I could take you all out to that pub and drink it all, you'd have the best day drinking it.
I mean, I had some Old Ale at the Pelt Trader a couple of months ago, and I did enjoy it. I like Old Ale anyway. I love the Adnams Old Ale.
Well, at a pub like that, where they know how it should taste because they're serving it every single day, and it's one of their biggest selling beers. It works really, really well. But to drink, to just be in a pub that's so welcoming, the beer's going to be good, the food's going to be good. They're the two most important things to me. I don't care so much when I'm in that pub about how the Harvey's people treat their staff, or whether or not they, kind of like let their horses run around, with their hooves off, or their shoes off for a day or something. I'm not quite sure how.
So you become the majority of the buying public at that point.
Yeah, because I just walk into a pub and there's really, really good beer and really good food, and the welcome is really good, and the people look after me.
Because
we're
in a minority.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to sell my beer to them. I think that if I'm still there in 2 or 3 years' time, I'll probably try and get them to have my cans in the fridge or something. Just put my cans in the fridge, tell them it's a local beer. I live 30 minutes away. The beer's made 1,000 miles away. But at least it's not made 12,000 miles away. Like beer is. But that's part of kind of what local is as well. It's not so much about where the beer is made. If you're in the shadow of the brewery, it's a little bit about who the people are who work for the business, and we see that all the time with all the big breweries who have their local salespeople who work in certain areas, and they're in the pubs all the time who sell their beers. They might be just the guy who just services all the lines, but because he's always in there, they're always going to sell his beer because it's the brewery he works for. So it's that kind of local. Where local isn't so much about the geographic region; it's about the people who are employed by the brewery who live near to you, or the people who are big advocates of the brewery who live near you.
Yeah. What about you, Steve? I mean, I think what are some of the things that you personally tend to influence you?
I'm not sure, actually. I mean, my view has certainly changed in the last few weeks, where I've made a commitment to not start getting so et up about the latest release.
Yes.
And the whole no mo FOMO hashtag.
Hashtag Miles Lambert.
Yeah. I've moved away from that, and I just want to enjoy good beer. Why at the same time trying to enjoy a range of beers as well. If I go into somewhere that I trust, I will probably try something new. So I trust that place. I trust the way they look after beer and the way they serve the beer, and I will then just go for just beers that I'm looking to enjoy and looking to drink. But
interestingly,
really
like
from the FOMO thing.
but I think I will have like a hit list of beers that I least, or breweries that I least wouldn't try.
Try?
Would.
Oh.
Would. Yeah. So, I think, there's always flavour of the month of, they seem to be like what everyone's talking about at the moment.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
I must try that one.
I don't think you can escape that. You're always going to have that.
Yeah.
But it's also part of the advertising, isn't it? I mean, you've got to get the ball rolling at some point as well. So when people are talking about the different beers, I mean, again, it depends where that talk's coming from and who's pushing what, why they're pushing it. I mean, a lot of the time, to be fair, and again, that's probably where I decide. I think there's a hype when I don't like the beer at the end of it, but a lot of the time, I do go with recommendations that other people have spoken about, but usually from people I trust as well. Whether that be people who blog, just people I know personally, or again, breweries that I trust. And especially if a brewery then mentions another beer from another brewery, you're thinking, oh, okay, then there's got to be something going on here. Then I do go with that a lot. And sometimes it just happens to be I'm going past somewhere, I see something in the window, or I pop in.
I think for me, the one brewery that kind of epitomises that over the last 6 months or so was Odyssey Brew Co. that I had none of their beers, but there were a lot of people talking about them on Twitter. So they were obviously gaining a lot of traction from a certain bubble within the community. So all of a sudden I was like, I must try their beers because there's a lot of people talking about them. So I tried their beers and I enjoyed their beers, and then I become part of that bubble that's then
Yeah, because
talking
you
about
then
this
spoke
brewery.
about it as well.
Yeah, and then it starts to build, and it's kind of, you always, I suppose, from where we are in terms of talking about beer on a podcast, is that we're always kind of looking for, well, who are that next brewery that people are talking about that might be that next one.
But that might even be an interesting separate topic, like who are the biggest influencers of beer taste, right? Because I'm sure there will be a handful of very active people that have quite a sway over that, right? At least on that social media world.
And then there's the next kind of level of it being really interesting to hear people who kind of know virtually nothing about beer. You know, if we could pull in just the average drinker in this pub who just come here because they live down the road or their work is down the road or something, it'd be interesting to pull them in and say, you know, why do you drink what you drink? And they'll go, well, I'm in a Brewdog pub, I just drink Brewdog.
Yes.
Or I'm in a Brewdog pub and I hate Brewdog, or my friends brought me here, so I drink all their guest beers. And there's kind of like all sorts of weird reasons that people drink what they drink.
But how much attention, I guess, do you pay as someone, you know, trying to sell beer to some of that noise around social media? And
I'm so busy doing my own shit.
You're not like, oh, maybe I better get my beers featured on Craft Beer Hour or on beer boards or
I wish
whatever.
I was that good, but I'm just doing my own shit, and then occasionally someone tweets me and I say, right, yes, would you like to be on my podcast? Yes. Would you like to ask some questions for my magazine? Yes. I just say yes all the time, and then people kind of give up asking me again and again if I would actually finally answer the questions that I promised that I would answer 4 months ago. So I'm not a very good person on the consumer side or the selling side. I'm not even sure I can provide it.
Why did we ask him?
So let's just try and start wrapping this thing up then, and just going round the table. I suppose I've already kind of answered it to a certain extent in terms of what is it that influences me. What's the one thing that really influences you guys in your buying decision? So Michael,
I think it's hard to say one thing. I think it's a combination of kind of what I see from people that I respect. I think it's a combination of what I hear from the breweries themselves and see how they interact. And then thirdly, I think it's around kind of availability and what I can actually get my hands on at any given point in time. I think they're the three key things that are influencing me.
Okay, Mike?
If push comes to shove, it would be brewery. So going to when you said Colonel earlier in your remark, I was in the Craft Beer Co. a couple of weeks ago. There's 45 beers on tap. I saw the Colonel beer and I decided I was going to have the Colonel beer before I knew what it was.
You always know what it's going to be like, don't you? Yeah.
Totally trustworthy.
Yeah.
So that would be where I had to go for it if I had to pinch one.
Okay. And Stu?
For me, I think I'm probably the interesting one, the fact that I came from New Zealand and for the first almost year I was here, I basically worked my way off probably a couple of dozen breweries in the UK just from drinking their beer and being so disappointed on tap in pubs, whether it be in keg or cask. And so now I've narrowed myself down into that trusted brewery range, which is horrible for me as a beer lover who just wants to try absolutely everything. But I've got down into that real trusted range where I know if I walk into a place and I don't know the person behind the bar who's serving it, who can tell me this is really good, I don't have enough money. You know, now that I have like a day job that pays me shitloads of money, like I used to have in the old days, I don't have enough money to spend it on beers that are not so good that I have to struggle through the pint. As a Scotsman,
You don't want to waste it.
a Scotsman who struggles through the pint, hating every sip of it, rather than just like tipping it out. And I know my accent is not Scottish, but
Well, I think that's been a big revelation for me in this podcast, how Scottish you actually are. It sounds like,
I mean, like it's in amongst everything I do, and certainly around the beer choice. It's not at all around price, but I earn so little money now compared to what I used to back in the old days. And I know beer so well that I really want to drink, you know, really, really good beer. So I trust, you know, the breweries I know that make the best beer, you know, which I can probably name on 2 hands, 10 fingers, who the best breweries in the UK are. And then I trust the people that I know that run really good pubs or really good bottle stores who are going to hand over a beer to me and know that it's worth the money that I'm paying for it.
So it boils down to trust.
It boils down to trust and just wanting to drink good beer.
Yeah, but it's trust either the people selling it, the people who are making it.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
trust.
Yeah.
If
trust.
you had to find an overarching
Trust.
connection, it's trust.
Absolutely.
Yeah, agree.
They should have saved you loads of time with your diagram.
Yeah, there you go.
A circle of trust.
Okay then, so let's just wrap this up then. We've started doing a regular feature on the show, which is a letters section, by which we actually mean tweets, which Martin hates that title.
Yeah,
and
I do
love
hate it.
But we still haven't come up with a better one yet. I think Twetters was still one of the best one, but I still think I'm going to say Twatters. So I'm sticking with letters for now. So there's just a couple this week that I want to mention. 2 of them are based on last week's show where we were talking about camera, the revitalisation project, and are cameras still relevant? So it might actually be interesting to see if you guys got any views on that as well. So James at Gammon Baron, and this one's probably very relevant for
I love this
where
one.
we're recording this week's show as well, is when Camera starts giving out Brewdog vouchers as an alternative, I'll consider membership. I think that's the moment where we jump the shark, isn't it? You know, getting your Brewdog vouchers as a Camera member. And then Gregor J said he's still torn as to whether it's better to join Camera and help try to change it from the inside or not. So, did you guys have any views on Camera?
I've got massive
and
views on
that
this
role
one.
they play?
Yeah.
I would say they are like the Labour Party. They were very, very relevant to beer drinkers 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and they have lost touch with who the beer drinkers are these days.
Do you think they've lost focus on what's important then? Or, like, why do you think that's happened? Because, I mean, I certainly think, you know, if you think about the money that goes to Camera and the money that they have to spend, they should be doing a much better job on using that to promote whatever it is that they're passionate about, and maybe that's kind of, they've lost their way a bit because they've got...
I totally think that. I think, you know, the world is such a different place to when Camera formed, and Camera are, to me, one of the most important organisations in the world. They really, you know, really did help maintain the integrity in the UK beer scene and what people do, but it's changed so much, unbelievably.
Yeah.
So in the same way that, you know, as I say, like it, you know, in the way that Labour have lost touch with the fact that they think that their voters are all working class people who join unions, but they're not. You know, Labour voters now are all Liberal people who are probably earning twice the money, you know, than what they would have been earning back in the old days. And Camera's the same.
Yeah, maybe I didn't articulate, but I think they were very passionate about their cause at a certain point in time.
Well, they still are.
Are they?
Yeah, they also
Yeah.
they know, because what Stuart said is that they're maybe lost in a moment in time, but they're still passionate about that moment. So let's not make any bones. They're still passionate about pubs. They're still passionate about real ale. What they haven't seen is that there's other things coming up in the fast lane ahead of them. They're in the middle lane,
Right.
and maybe going over to the left sometimes to the slow lane. There are other things going across,
They're in the middle lane doing 50,
but they're still.
and
they're
they
still-
need to.
And that annoys a lot of people,
They're still,
right?
they're still passionate about it, though.
Yeah.
They are
Yeah.
still passionate about it. So don't think they're not passionate about what they're doing. It's just that there's probably still too many who haven't realised that there has been a bit of a leap
Yeah.
from what they were campaigning against.
Oh, I guess.
So they're
I
campaigning
guess
for
it's like,
is still
and
fairly
it's-
accurate, but what they're campaigning
It's like
against
they've
has moved
forgotten
on.
who the enemy is.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
To
They've
use
lost
a
sight.
Hunger Games quote.
I think the camera one is going to be one that's going to roll on for weeks
Yeah,
and weeks.
but it's still interesting
Agreed.
to see other
Yes,
people.
yes.
Yeah.
And it should. I mean, it should. It's only, you know, I've never ever been a member of camera, and I've often wished that I should be. And I probably should be right now because it's, you know, it's a business expense for me to be.
And I think we're not, right, and I think that's the big thing is, should I expect them to change if I'm not a member? Like, I think that's what a lot of people are grappling with, right? I think
Yeah.
that was one of the.
yeah.
Should I join and
Should I join and try
be
and
part
change
of
it from
it,
the
or
inside,
should
yeah.
I stand on the outside and
I think everyone should join and they should harass. Yeah. In fact,
Lobby.
Just from that question, I'm going to join myself this week.
Wouldn't that be great though?
I'm going to join and I'm going to send you guys the receipt to say that I've joined.
If-
We'll
if
publish
all
the picture of it.
But wouldn't it be great for all the people that sit in this bubble that we've been talking about this evening, that maybe aren't members, actually joined, and as a result of those people joining, actually made a change?
I would join if there was a code of conduct, and they actually kicked out people that were either sexist or a whole bunch of other things that you see are quite unsavoury. If they had one of those, I would join in a second.
I'm sure they probably do have one.
If Mark Johnson joins, I'll join.
I think you'll probably find Mark is probably already a member. I'm sure he'll let us know. So just a couple of other letters that we've had this week. So Ruth Mitchell at Beer Fairy, apparently randomly shouting it's bourbon like burr, not bourbon like biscuit on a pack train isn't normal. Who knew? I'm guessing that's our pronunciation of a certain beer that we drank recently.
Oh yeah,
So is it bourbon or is it bourbon?
it's probably whenever I'm saying it.
Is it pronunciation or pronunciation?
I think it's pronunciation. I always get that wrong as well. People love pulling us up on our pronunciation of things.
Anyone that does a
I know the Beer
podcast
Fairy,
knows
she's
that.
always drunk, so she probably doesn't know the difference.
But shouting it out on a train, wouldn't you have loved that moment?
So it was the equivalent of shouting at the TV then.
Yeah, absolutely. But shouting on a packed train. And I think you had one final letter.
Yeah,
this week.
Ronnie Bean said, thinking about Doctor Who this morning, hangover from last night's Opinions. So I don't know if you got a hangover from drinking while listening to Opinions or me banging on about Doctor Who. But I quite liked it because he mentioned Doctor Who in the quote. So it was good enough
I
for
think
me.
that was
I
one that was
think
more for you
maybe
than
he
it
was
was for me.
celebrating the fact that his favourite beer podcast and his favourite TV show combined, and he
together.
celebrated
In that
with
case,
a couple of beers. Maybe that was
Miles,
it.
look out, he might become my number one fan.
Okay, so next week coming up, we've got another crossover show where we are doing this is the coffee and beer
Oh, yep.
crossover that we recently did with
And
Roland.
you are going to learn a lot,
from and
mainly from someone else.
I sat there and learnt so much in the hour that we recorded. So Roland from Stephen Rowland's Beer Podcast is with us next week. Roland also works for Has Been Coffee, and you are going to listen to a great hour's worth of us drinking coffee and us also drinking beers,
Yep.
and mostly Roland talking about coffee, and
Brilliant.
mostly us being amazed at Roland's knowledge
Yeah.
of coffee. But that's all to come next week. Guys, it's been a real pleasure to have you on this evening. Stu, thanks for giving us your time. Michael, thanks for being part of the crossover within a collab, within a crossover. It's been good fun, and I hope we can all sort out what our buying decisions are as a result of tonight. But, cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. I can't wait to listen to you guys sober drinking coffee. That's going to be crazy.